There we go.
We're live. Welcome to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson, your host for today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Variant O'Connor.
I am here, brother, and I've been looking forward to this show. It's gonna be an interesting one. I think that it's not my normal Tuesday night show where I'm so relaxed I'm almost half asleep. So I'm not sure. Like, am I gonna be a good broadcaster today, or am I gonna make a mess
You
of this? You
gonna
know what I
be
mean?
more sharp because it's daytime. Like, so folks watching this, and I know if you're listening to a podcast, you're not gonna see any of this, but like, there's sunshine in my attic. It's bright in here. We're
Yeah.
recording this on a Sunday afternoon because we want to have some evergreen shows. I'm gonna be going out on parental leave, and so we want to have some other stuff we could talk about, throw in there as episodes if I happen to be busy with caring for a newborn child and or tending to the birth of my child. So it's good to be prepared for this type of thing. And so what we decided to do today, why are we doing this on Sunday afternoons? We're just gonna have some fun. We're gonna talk about like some like libertarian like pop culture, right? Like stuff that might not even be explicitly libertarian, although sometimes it is. Moments or series in pop culture that are worth exploring, they're worth talking about. I got mine is I will tell you heavy on the sci-fi side, but Tim has a bunch of stuff too.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I got to where it's like, well, what things that help me when I'm sitting in front of the TV just go, holy crap, I hate that guy, or just like, that makes like perfect sense, or it's just like this system is broken kind of messaging, which helped advance me because Kevin, I started kind of as a liberal. I kind of like it, traveled down a conservative pathway. I liked issues about finances and fiscal conservatism and
mhm.
being socially liberal. All those things based on how I grew up as a kid were important to me, and um then I got like kind of like hardcore conservative, but not like I wanted to avoid the trappings of religion. And then I just got here. I'm like, Larry Sharp did a great job. Gary Johnson did a great job of offering me concepts. And look, I liked Ron Paul, but he was sort of fringe for me at the time. I'm like, this guy's a little bit crazy. He scared me.
That's
You know
fair.
what I mean?
I thought that at first too. It's totally
What's
fair.
that?
I thought that at first too, but
Yeah. All right. So you get it. That's cool.
yeah. I was like, "Oh, you want me to listen to the guy ranting on about gold? Gold!" I made fun of him. But eventually I
Yeah, and
did
a
like the
little bit
ideas. But
how dare he stand against our military aggression
yeah,
in
right.
foreign theaters? I was a little bit like that, you know?
He's not supporting our troops,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah, and I realized that you can be, in support of the military and people that have served in the military and realize that some of our overseas activities are well, completely inappropriate.
Yeah, 100%. So we're gonna dive into a bunch of our things that we think aren't as on the nose as someone like Ron Paul or some of those other folks who are trying to win people over to the ideology, but things that spread the ideas of either being like anti-state, anti-authority, pro free market economics, things like that. So or just in some other way interesting and disruptive, calling out corruption and stagnation in a way that advances the ideals of liberty. um, sometimes in a consequentialist sense, sometimes in a deontological sense, like whatever it is. We have a few examples. We'll run through a few of them quick. We'll spend some time on more. But for folks listening today, drop some of your favorite shows, movies, songs. We can't really play the songs because YouTube gets grouchy about that, but we can talk about them for sure. We have a couple songs in here too. And we'll mention them on air. So we'd love to hear from you. Again, favorite movie, shows, books, etc. And I'm always looking for new books too. Love audiobooks. That's my thing. So if it's out there in audiobook, I will be likely to listen to it. Um, so we're gonna head to the show in a minute. We've done enough pre-show stuff. We're gonna still record. We got to record our WYSL version, but you know how we're gonna do. We're gonna do the main show and then breaks, and then do some stuff afterwards too. If we got more to talk about, we'll keep talking about it. That's how it goes. All right. So we're gonna head back in or head in about 10 seconds.
Now, an hour of clarity for exhausted people of our nation mired in toxic partisanship. Left versus right, us versus them. While we pay to keep our politicians fighting, how do we, the people, rise up and solve the great challenges of our time? We do it by embracing freedom and liberty. There may be no such thing as a free lunch, but this hour is as close as it gets. Welcome to A Free Solution.
Welcome to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilshire today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Variant O'Connor.
I'm here, Kevin, and I in the pre-show we discussed. I'm pretty excited for this show. It's going to be an interesting time. We're going to be talking about, for me, how I got to philosophical pondering about libertarianism and how pop culture and events that I saw in TV shows kind of got me thinking that perhaps the government isn't our friend. Perhaps this two-party system is a bit of a disaster, and perhaps there's a better way forward. So, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to think of different ways to how is that message being communicated? How are we getting to those points? And so, Tim, we're gonna jump in today with a few different examples of in pop culture, in entertainment, where do some of these values get reflected? Not just the stuff that we do or that, and we were talking before the show about what Ron Paul does or other advocates of liberty. How are these ideas getting spread? Because I think that's an important way. Ideas do get spread through entertainments, through getting you to think about things situationally by getting into the minds and the settings of characters and worlds that are created in fiction. I mean, certainly that's a way to spread propaganda on, the left. It's a way to spread socialist and progressive propaganda. And, so why not build these situations analogous to the real world that get people thinking through, kind of both the emotional and practical side of liberty. And so, Tim, do you want to kick it off with one of your examples, or you want me to go?
I certainly do. And so, two of my favorite characters of all time come from basically The Simpsons, where we have the Kodos and the Kang running for running for president of the United States, and Homer Simpson gets involved. And it's basically this whole show about voting for the lesser of two evils. And what we have are literal aliens from another planet that eat human beings running for president, and the entire world gets behind one or the other. And I just think that that's a perfect example of the situations that we face in our day-to-day political campaigns. What do you think? Am I
no, right? So you're saying the scene was like a Treehouse of Horror episode, I think is
yeah,
what it
but
was.
they made other appearances.
Yeah, they
but
have.
Yes, them running for president came from the Treehouse of Horrors.
Yeah, so that one, it was actually they taken over the bodies of who was running at the time, Bob Dole and Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Right, and it was revealed that it was just Kodos and Kang, and they're up at the podium and they're like, "What are you going to do? Vote third party and waste your vote?"
Yeah,
and Ross Perot's up there, like, "Oh, come on."
Yeah, I mean, waste your vote. It was a repeating message throughout the entire Simpsons, Kodos versus Krang, and that repeating theme of those guys. And plus, I did like the fact that really our politicians are actually lizards in human skin suits. I thought that was an interesting take. I want to be clear.
Oh yeah. So I mean, and that's like a little one-off thing. I wouldn't accuse, The Simpsons of being a libertarian show ever, but that one-off thing of being subversive about the control of the two-party system, and I don't remember who ended up winning, but at the end of that episode or that piece, Homer is in chains and they're pushing stuff around. He's like, "Don't blame me. I voted for Kodos."
And that's a regular theme that we see in politics today. Don't blame me, I voted for Trump. Don't blame me, I voted for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful distillation of political philosophy and the manipulations of a two-party system where to me it often appears that this two-party system simply serves a system, right? Certainly kind of increases the centralized planning aspects of our government, where the Democrats and the Republicans aren't really that that far apart about big government solutions to problems that they've created. And so I did, in fact, really enjoy Kodos and Kang, and they brought me closer to libertarianism. Let's be, to be clear.
Yeah. And that's again some of the examples we went throughout today. Again, like if you're listening to the live version of this show, again, leave your examples of ideas of like books or even like one-off like jokes or skits that reflect the values of liberty here. And because these are these things like these little ideas that can be implanted. They get you to think about like the injustice of the two-party system, the sometimes folly of the two-party system in this case. Like, oh, okay, like we can't waste our vote even if you're literally choosing between two aliens that are promising to enslave you. Can't break out of that system. But so we have several other things that we could end up talking about today too. Because again, we wanted to explore some of these ideas like on like a mass culture level. But again, if you have a book or something that maybe is not as popular, like fiction book, let's go with fiction books. Send them over our way. We'd love to hear from you. I'll take one of the next ones. Again, this is a popular one, and something that most people have seen, and it's the Star Wars series, like the entire thing. Now I know what some of you are thinking, because if some of you are very into like just know way too much about Star Wars, and I'm not quite there. I have not read all of the books, but I've seen all the movies. I've seen most of the cartoon shows. I've seen a lot of Star Wars. Now some of you who know a bit of trivia about it know that like in the third movie, George Lucas was trying to take a swipe at libertarianism by calling General Grievous's ship the Invisible Hand. He was saying he was like too capitalist and stuff, right? But overall, the series is libertarian, and I want to make the case one that like the prequel movies. Now, I promise I won't go too far in this, but the prequel movies, like the corruption that happens in the Republic, is in part, it's a corruption of increasing control of the state. It's a corruption that stems from fear, and it's a corruption that stems from war. And if you haven't seen the cartoon series Clone Wars, like I definitely recommend seeing that, because that to me has strong libertarian themes. Again, what ends up happening to the Jedi Council and the Senate is in part a product of war, right? It was something that was a long time coming in this universe that they've created, but you start to see the moral values of the Jedi Order get degraded because they were tricked, or at least had fallen to the point of deciding that they were going to be the ones to lead a war effort, that they are the ones who are going to accept, oh, we just have all these troops and we spent all this money. Okay, I guess we're gonna do this. We're gonna lead the clones and we're gonna save the Republic. And they do it, against the forces of separatists who are just trying to. In the Clone Wars treats them a lot more sympathetically than the later on in series than the movies do. But basically, they're like, well, we don't think the Republic represents us very effectively anymore, and so we're going to go do our own thing. And then they engage in a war to try to bring them back into the Republic, right? And the movies sort of treat it like, oh, these are just like greedy capitalists who are either under control of like shadowy forces, or they are, or they're just trying to make more money and not pay taxes and stuff. Like, so like there's a bit of a like a there's a bit of a like a conspiratorial element in addition to like, oh, these are greedy elements, but like part of it's just like, hey man, like you guys are far away from us, like you don't know like what we really stood for. And again, that's separate from how they treated their military engagements, which was honestly horrific for a children's cartoon show. Like it was, my goodness, there's a war crime committed on both sides, and almost every single episode of the Clone Wars is bad. But like again, there's all these different ways in which like war corrupts the soul of Anakin Skywalker. Like how he gets to the point of becoming Darth Vader is by like losing sight of the justice of what a republic is supposed to be, and the frustration, like the collapse of the Republic is in part a frustration stemming from stagnation of trying to like manage something so big. The Republic becomes so big and so unwieldy that they start giving power to a central authority figure that in this case ends up being Chancellor Palpatine and eventually Emperor Palpatine. That they start, moving towards this system where like, well, okay, well, we've got to act fast because of the war and because economic conditions are deteriorating. So we're going to give it to the Chancellor because the Chancellor is going to be able to fix things quickly, right? And that is like classic, like Hayek's Road to Serfdom, like conditions where you end up with a system of authoritarianism, and that you get in the third movie that, that great line of, this is how democracy dies, with applause, right? Because all the fear, all the uncertainty, all of the terrible economic conditions that end up getting created by government stumbling over itself. In this case, somewhat purposefully, it's by the machinations of the Sith, but you end up with a condition where authoritarianism becomes inevitable because good people don't stand up. They get caught in that same line of thinking. And then you end up with an empire that is both politically and economically oppressive. Like the conditions of places like Tatooine in the original Star Wars movies are driven in part by the Empire prioritizing political control over economic freedom and wealth creation. Like they are a highly regulated area. And there's a great episode of Alienating the Audience that talks about this. I know I reference this guy all the time. Andrew Heaton's podcast is fun, but they end up talking about some of the economic conditions where you have to run everything through the imperial bureaucracy, and everything is taxed high. And like, again, if anyone starts like gaining too much wealth, too much power, and they're not under the control of the empire, then they'll cut them down. So there's no opportunity for people to be able to thrive in that system, which ends up making revolution inevitable because conditions deteriorate so much. And then finally, my last Star Wars one, so I don't spend the whole dang show talking about Star Wars, because I absolutely could spend an hour on this, is to just talk about Andor. And again, if you haven't watched that series, it's a Disney Plus series. It's on. It's a short series that focuses on a specific rebel, but again, he isn't coming at it from an ideological perspective initially. He's just coming at it from he was caught up in injustice and corruption perspective, right? And it ends up building on like just the everyday pettiness of corrupt governments, of like, hey, here's someone who like was trying to abuse someone else, who was trying to like just rob them, shake them down. And, you end up with a situation where overzealous police end up cracking down on entire communities and turning those communities against the government, because they're just like, well, we gotta stop crime while failing to police the corruption in their own ranks. And it ends up dwelling on and building to like the injustice of like their criminal justice system, and the ways in which average everyday people for small crimes could end up spending years in jail and effectively in forced labor camps over something as simple as being in the wrong place at the wrong time, which happens to happen to the main character twice.
There's countless like narratives from many movies where the good guy ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he has to take on an entire corrupt bureaucracy. But since you're a Star Wars expert, I want to like reflect back on a scene where Padme was acting in the Senate and gave this like passionate speech about kindness and some like. Let's see if you can help me flesh this out, because I was like, as I listened to it, I'm like, it feels like she's setting up this inevitability where there is going to be a war versus of like capitalism versus socialism, and versus like a pseudo kindness by the government turning unto itself, where it kind of destroys people's ability to like interact. I don't know if I'm landing my question very well, but do you know what I'm talking about there?
It's one of her speeches in one of the movies. Like,
Yeah,
like
one of her speeches in
Yeah.
one of the movies where she was a senator, and she gave this passionate speech in that circular Senate chamber where
Right.
I felt as though, to me, there was a message in there of again, this inevitable consequence of, if we let the government be the arbiter of good and evil, we eventually always end up with evil, right? We always end up with a sort of violence and a war. And I may not be bringing that point home as well as I would like to.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the specific thing that you're talking about. I was trying to look it up a second ago, but yeah, roughly that. And, again, it's interesting that, they end up making this person who is sent, like how the conflict sort of kicks off in the movies is like, again, separatists blockade, well, originally like a banking institution kind of blockades Naboo over trade disagreements. Like
Right.
that's how I like, people kind of roast like George Lucas for like, you made this about like trade disagreements, this is about like tariffs and stuff, like, but yeah, that's kind of like what it ends up starting out as, is like a trade disagreement that ends up with an occupation by what becomes separatist forces, and then um a, a request for help from the Republic to be able to intervene on that. And that's how like the conflict initially starts out, like, hey, we have these people, they're just like banking clans, like radical capitalists, essentially trying to enforce their own types of like trade agreements on other planets, and please help us, government.
Yeah.
And then it goes like horribly wrong, right? It's just like all that help, all that the requests for that help ends up with everyone ceding their own liberty to this new republic and being occupied. And
Yeah, so that's the sense of it. That's what I was
yeah,
getting at. That there's the bigger the government gets, there's the inevitable oppression that comes from even an act of kindness, right? So you could compare it to the situation in the Middle East, and I don't want to get into that too specifically, but there is this governmental power, this need for power that inevitably corrupts itself. And it goes to that old saying of, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think there's lots of messages like that in the Star Wars series, where the good guys are always tempted by evil, and the bad guys, in some sense, started out as good or are tempted by, coming back to good. Like,
yeah.
Anakin coming back and trying to figure out a way to save his son or interact with his son. You know what I mean? Like, it was
Well, I
always
mean, like,
kind of there.
a lot of Anakin's arc is like he wants to be able to control everything, right? Like
Yes.
that's his whole deal, right? And that is again, I think possibly somewhat like intentional reflection of what George Lucas's whole story is, in terms of how the Republic turns into the Empire. Is okay, we've got to like control this, we've got to manage this, but in the process of like trying to control everything, you end up destroying the very things that make like the Republic worth preserving. And Anakin ends up like destroying the things that make his life worth living by like trying to exercise that control. And again, he does that with his mother, when he's trying to save his mother, and he ends up slaughtering a bunch of the folks out on Tatooine. And with Padme, when he tries to save Padme, he ends up like falling to the dark side because he thinks he needs to give into this desire for control. And by giving into that desire for control, he ends up corrupting himself and losing everything that he loved. And the Republic does the same thing. And again, you see that set of consequences happen over and over again, especially in the Clone Wars series. Is like, hey, well, like we can control this, we can make it happen, like we can like control these people and like get all the outcomes we want, but in doing so, they destroy their morals, they destroy their economy, and they ultimately destroy the political liberty that they had spent millennia building.
That's perfectly said, and that's basically the point I wanted to get at. And again, like, certainly that the whole Senate chamber and that whole concept of this intergalactic governing force caused some cognitive dissonance in my brain. Like, it definitely was like,
Yeah, right. I mean, like the whole
is
government
never
system
gonna
sort of
work.
strange because there's also like queens of planets and stuff, and then the planets are sort of represented, but it's a strange. And then you have like situations like Mandalore, which are like they're more or less independent. And what happens in the Clone Wars series is interesting because they like same thing, like there's an excuse created for invasion, like, hey, we've got to help them, and Mandalore's like, please do not help, we do not want your help, please get away from us. And they're like, nope, we're gonna help them anyway. And then it ends up with like the slaughter of millions of people.
Yeah,
And
we're
they get
gonna help
caught up
them
in this
so
conflict.
hard that we have to kill them all.
Yeah, it's so yeah, ends up being not great for Mandalore. Spoilers there, but yeah, if you have like I don't know, like 200 hours on your time, I'd definitely check out Star Wars. All the Star Wars. There's a lot of Clone Wars, and it's funny because it's a weird series. Sometimes it feels like a children's show, and then other times you're like, oh, that was hey, there's a whole episode about fragging. That has a pretty intense like arc there.
Yeah.
and conspiracies and control. It's a great series. And then there's some episodes that feels like a kid show, but Andor, definitely an adult show, definitely worth checking out in terms of like some of the speeches that they give and the concepts they build in there for around the criminal justice system. But we're up to our break for the first segment. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. We're going to be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon.
Should we do the reason clip?
Oh yeah, we could do it a reason clip. Yeah, I mean, like honestly, like it's easier to play on the show. We could do that clip if you want. Or that was was that the Star Wars one or the Star Trek one?
The reason clip is the Star Trek one I have queued up. Just to point to people towards Reason TV, where they have a bunch of like very entertaining breakdowns of like and mockumentaries and all sorts of stuff that I find to be pretty humorous, And just this could point people in the direction of Reason TV, who occasionally drives me crazy lately with some of that, what I would call, this might make you mad, but like this virtue signaling kind of stuff where they take on issues where, like, they took on Oliver Anthony, and I'm just like, did you really have to do that? And then they kind of like,
dude, I do not get like the right wing libertarian like anger at some writer at Reason decides to be like, oh, Oliver Anthony, I have mixed feelings about his son. Vivek Ramaswamy, I've got mixed feelings about that guy. And I'm like, oh, Reese, and then
that was the big response. I do think that some of the things that they do are okay, even if they're a little bit offensive to get people to kind of check out their content. I do think that that's a social media game plan. And then you get into the breakdown of how she took on Oliver Anthony, if you will. And it was not as awful as it kind of like the headline came out to be, And sure, I had a little couple, you and I talked about Oliver Anthony in a different show. And there was pieces of a song that I didn't like. One or two.
That's one of the songs I was thinking about. Like we could bring that up as a thing to talk about. That song too. Does that reflect our values or not? But
all right, let me try this screen share. And I didn't want to do it during the radio show because I'm not particularly always good at this stuff. If that makes extra sense or any sense, I guess I should say.
Easier to edit out during the breaks. So.
Right. So here we go. I think I've got it queued up. I don't know where we went. All right. Well, wait, I see what I did. Okay, ready? I'm going to hit play. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. All right, guys, I'm going to get like... Oh, I'm not at the right spot.
Perfect.
Computer run program Trump presidency. In program. Computer run program Clinton presidency. In program. Google Gary Johnson. It's nice, but I just don't want to throw my vote away. Okay, so to recap, go back in time, find some whales, save the planet Earth.
Standard Shatner maneuver. We're counting on you, Captain.
While I have you.
So, look, guys, I want to send you in the direction of checking out that on your own. Only because it's 5 minutes, right? And it's a hilarious 5 minutes to learn about some basic libertarian philosophy, and it definitely is going to make you laugh, all of it. It's very, very well done.
Yeah, now he's got some good ones because he has libertarian Star Trek, he has libertarian Star Wars, he has libertarian Game of Thrones, which is great, which I didn't even have on my list of things to share. But
yeah.
But so there's some good ones out there. Andrew Heaton put some funny stuff out.
Yeah, Andrew Heaton, right? Or Wheaton?
Yeah.
Okay. Heaton. So I think we should, for the next introduction, when we get back to the show, I want to talk about South Park and not necessarily point at anything specific per se, but talk about the fact that how well they expose, I want to say, like behaviors and identity politics, and how they make constant jokes about like the power of the government and gentrification and how everything can like go wrong. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are you
No,
down with that part for
yeah,
like?
no, let's talk about it.
Okay, cool.
Well, this is Tim. This is half your show too.
Yeah, true.
You can talk about whatever you want, man. It's your turn. I spent like all of 16 minutes just rambling on, mostly solo about Star Wars, and also managed to not talk about Han Solo at all somehow.
Which yeah. How did we avoid that?
Yeah. So but we should go back to the main show in a minute. Yeah, just how did I not talk about Han Solo? So yeah, we'll go back to the show in 20 seconds. Again, you have other actually someone threw out a book, FDR's Folly. I've heard people recommend this one before too. So I think that was like a nonfiction thing. And then Patricia on YouTube says The Walking Dead showed us all kinds of ways to rebuild society.
Yeah, I'd like to handle it. I didn't really think of The Walking Dead ahead of this show, but I'd like to handle that on the radio because I loved The Walking Dead, especially the first few seasons. And I think we could talk about the hellscape that they created there as an inevitable consequence of the way society's heading in a certain sense. And that may be me as a libertarian reading into it, but and then they talk about the nature of man in that show quite a bit. Not necessarily directly, right? But indirectly. Yeah. And what would we revert to or what would we become without an organized system? And so maybe I think we could bring that up. And
yeah, we talk about that.
All right, cool.
All right. Sorry. So now we'll go back in 10 seconds from now. Welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Variant O'Connor.
I'm here, Kevin, and look, I'll lead off this section and this segment of the show with one of my favorite all shows of all time. Let's put it that way, and that is South Park. Okay, when I started watching it, this is like 1997. I was not a libertarian. I was kind of a neocon, kind of wrestling with the fact that Bill Clinton was a fiscal conservative and socially liberal who ended up raising taxes and ballooning the debt, even though he had some good ideas. And then he did things like open free trade with Mexico and the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, which I was like, I want to say actually kind of perplexed, puzzled, and afraid of, back then. And then it came around to like, maybe this is actually a good idea. You know what I mean? Maybe it all worked out. Maybe that was something that happened. So this is going back to 1997 is when the show started. And since 1997, I have found out that the writers for that show, this Matt Stone and Trey Parker, are actually like devoted libertarians. They actually believe in liberty. And as a general principle, what they do is almost every show introduce some sort of concept of mocking the government, mocking identity politics, mocking the political system, mocking the fact that either culture is downstream from politics or upstream from politics, but regardless of that the powers that be will take advantage of emotional issues to divide us. That's how I feel about South Park.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm making more of it than they actually exist because I just want more people to check it out and from a libertarian perspective. But what do you think?
No, I mean that's a theme of a lot of their shows. Now I think about the remember the Toilet Safety Administration episode? Remember that one?
Yeah.
Right. So and then they start like someone gets I think injured on a toilet, right? And so they decide to keep everyone safe, you're gonna need to. They start with you're gonna need to just sit on a toilet facing the front, right? And then it ends up becoming a thing where everyone's got to have the TSA in their bathroom and they've got to check their butts and they can, and it becomes a whole thing. And part of the conflict is they end up having this debate over something, over something trivial while their liberty is being yanked away from them. And they're just so focused on well, should you sit? Is it nice to be able to sit and pee facing the toilet on the front because you can play with stuff on the tank, or or should you be able to pee standing up, and is it your right to do that? And they're fighting over that. Meanwhile, the TSA is just like becoming increasingly more ridiculous with metal detectors in every bathroom and like just the whole thing. And it's funny how like they point out like these sometimes silly cultural battles are taking place in the midst of the more serious issue happening.
Absolutely. And so to point to that issue, I can remember where South Park wanted a Whole Foods, right? And how that changed the entire complexion and composure of their city to the detriment of all of the local residents. They changed an entire section of town, and it threatened to take over everything that South Park stood for, which is kind of nothing in a way, but you know what I mean, right? Like they're just like, all right, let's gentrify this neighborhood so we can meet Whole Foods metrics to come here and give us the grocery store of our dreams.
Right.
Like, think about that. Like, think about that concept. It was so hilariously done. I mean, I simply just loved it, you know?
Yeah, but they have a few good ones. Again, like all the ones where like they decide to like panic and like do something about a problem. There's another one where they had like the gluten episode, even though in that one, like I think like everyone's kind of like making fun of it wasn't the FDA, it was the agriculture one.
The Department of Agriculture.
Department of Agriculture.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, like we're gonna regulate gluten now because that's why everyone's going gluten free, because if you have any gluten, it's actually gonna make your your thing fly explode and fly off. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
So it was that one of the South Park episodes that I also really enjoyed was the one where they eventually got so self-indulgent, so in love with their ideas that they started sniffing their own farting into wine glasses.
Oh yeah, those
talking about
like when they're like driving Priuses and stuff, and they started sniffing.
Oh, it was. I mean, it was freaking epic, Kevin. It was a mocking of. Again, I see it as identity politics, a mocking of the culture of arrogance and presumption and pseudo intellectuality, which isn't even a word but like a pseudo intellectual would grab onto a word like that. So it was, I don't know. I laughed and I watched it 2-3 times, and it was just a good show. So I want to invite people to watch South Park, check out the messaging. And
I was trying to look it up too. Like it was the USDA who was saying it, and they kept going on in the episode. They're like, yeah, well, we have to tell them what to do. That's why we had the food pyramid, and then the plate. And if we didn't tell people how to eat, they'd just eat dirt and chairs and stuff.
Yeah,
they're just like they're like mocking the self-importance of like government bureaucrats who are just like, oh, without us, like people just wouldn't know how to survive. So I love that. Again, it's just mildly subversive stuff to just to say like, look, some of these folks are ridiculous, and I've seen like real life situations like that play out. Like it reminded me of like I heard the person who'd become mayor of Rochester is city councilwoman Lovely Warren at the time, saying, oh yeah, we need government institutions, like that's why we need the FAA. If we didn't have the FAA, how would we land planes? And I'm like,
wow,
you don't think everyone else would be able to figure out how to land planes if we didn't have like specifically a federal aviation administration? Like we just wouldn't be able to figure it out.
We just wouldn't be able to come up with
no way to do it. Like
what's that guy Eric who does the bit about roads and F them HOE butt roads? Like it was beautiful. Like leave that stuff to the smart people. This is level 1 stuff. We will figure out how to make a flat place from here to there that people will be able to travel on. It was just well done.
Yeah.
I can't
there are things things that are possible to coordinate, and people like can't get out of the mindset. So that's why I love that like that USDA line. Is just because like I've seen it play out in real life. I've seen it where like we couldn't possibly do this thing, even though other countries do this thing without a federally controlled like infrastructure. We couldn't possibly do this thing without the government. I'm like, yes, we can. The government's just made of people. Like that's what it is. It's people, and like there are other ways to figure it out. So yeah. like that type of stuff.
So
all right.
I wanna force a segue to a comment from
Yes.
a fan of the show who is even checking us out on our evergreen kind of podcast. But one of her favorite things is talking about one of my favorite things is talking about The Walking Dead, Kevin, and the post-apocalyptic nature, the inevitable consequence of a government with too much power and some sort of research that would create a virus that would cause people to walk around wanting to devour living human people's brains or bodies. Like, so, anyways, in this post-apocalyptic hellscape, government has been destroyed, right? And people, the show really talks about the human nature and forming cliques and cooperatives and the likelihood that there will be bad actors using violence to oppress other people. And I've always felt like the show did a wonderful job, even though I think that in a sense, for me, I think that people would be more inclined to be cooperative. And I think, frankly, they didn't come up with a way to resolve the zombie menace fast enough. Like, I think that people would come up with some
Starts
situations
to become
and
a bit ridiculous
scenarios.
after a while.
Yeah, I'm like, well, why wouldn't we just dig a moat and let them flood into the ocean? Like, we could literally dig a trench from somewhere where there's a bunch of zombies right down into a big pile of water and get rid of most of them. Like, they'd have to cross that line at some point. I know railroad tracks were a big problem for them. So anyways, Kevin, did I lose you?
No, I'm still here. Just
Okay.
my camera apparently disconnected, but
All right, that's
you
fine.
know,
Good. Anyway, so what do you think about my take of The
you don't need to
Walking
see
Dead?
my
You think
my face.
it introduces a libertarian perspective, or does it? Am I way off base there?
In terms of The Walking Dead, like to me, like what's challenging with a lot of these like post-apocalyptic shows, like what you talked about, is like I think for the most part, people do find ways to cooperate. People do find ways to like overcome these situations, because there's a lot of incentive there for, I think, the forces of like markets to like react, and just like the forces of like people wanting to act to solve problems, right? So as you said, like the could just find a way to like get them all into the ocean. Gun manufacturers would be like, okay, this is our moment. Like we have a product and we have an audience for it. And
Yeah,
so some of these, like the only way, like, because I feel like slow motion, like apocalypse movies, anything that doesn't take place over like a very short period, like we're talking like a week of time, like strike me as somewhat incredulous.
sure. There was a certain incredulity to the beginning of the show, but there would be a greater incentive than the show provided for people to cooperate, collaborate, and protect each other and themselves. So
Yeah.
would a government eventually arise out of that? Would the guy Jeffrey from that place in Hilltop, would he eventually rise to some level of power? I think in a society like that, that dude would have got tarred and feathered in
Yeah.
the third show. Like
Yeah,
when he
maybe. I
ran his
mean, like,
mouth one too many times, he would have got wrecked, right? Like they were
no,
just
but
saying,
like,
you know what? You're not charging nothing no more. Go make a bowl, you know?
yeah, and like there is a certain point, like in a state of nature, right? Like where you like this is why governments formed in the first place, right? Because governments were useful in some sense. You say, okay, we have someone who's like bullying us and stealing from us, but like we know the level of bullying and stealing that they're gonna do, but we don't know what the bandits are gonna do. So right, so like that's how governments form. It's a gang brought together. That's a protection racket, like. I know it's not a romantic way to think of government, but that's kind of what it is.
But it is accurate.
Yeah, that's what it. And that's why the first government's formed. It's like, hey, we have a bunch of strong guys, and like you're gonna give us like, I don't know, 15-20% of your crop, but then we're gonna make sure that these bad guys don't take your crop, right? Like that's how government's formed.
Right.
And so like as long as they deliver on that protection, it might make sense. But like we live in a society where like we don't exactly have to have that deal. Like we don't have to like live under the thumb of your control. Like. So why should we give into that? But like, I don't know, generally, like, I think that you can have like good systems, like where you'd end up going wrong is where you have systems that are either like built on coercion very quickly, which could happen. Like people are scared. They want like some semblance of safety and order. And then
Sure.
systems where like you do not allow like markets to work, right? Like where you just start shutting down, like, hey, listen, like this is a crisis, so we can't price gouge, we can't like sell goods at a higher price, and it doesn't matter if like we're not going to be able to get like goods like fresh water in here. We got to make sure that it's free and fair. And like, which I'm going to give like an anti-endorsement. There's this book called the Lightest Object in the Universe. That's how they did it. It's like straight up communist prop. They kept stopping to like comment on like how much they hate capitalism and how much they love them. It was the most insufferable freaking book I have ever read. Love my wife, but this was I did not like that recommendation she gave me, but because I kept doing that. I'm like, oh, you know what? It's bad that these people who are bringing in water from the mountains are charging too much for water. I'm like, guys, you didn't have clean water. Who cares? They have to go on a dangerous trek and protect their goods from bandits to get water. Like, what?
On social media today, Kevin, one of the hardest things in the world to do is counter the narrative about price gouging in a disaster. It's like you just say, look, they like price gouging a roof, price gouging fresh water, price gouging gasoline that came from 50 miles away or 200 miles away. It's like, why are they bringing a much needed product to an area in desperate need? And one dude having gas benefits everybody in that area. It doesn't like it's
and again, the people in the area, like they could choose to cooperate or not cooperate. Like there are people like who are providing services like fixing up bicycles, but those require resources in order to fix up the bicycles, which then provides greater value to the people they were selling the services to, or making food. And like, oh, well, we just share this. I'm like, she needs to get ingredients to go and make this food in order to do that. Like, why not have like a financial incentive for that? Oh, we're just going to share this stuff. No, but then it's going to run out. There's no like way for her to then take the resource that she's been given and then go get more of that stuff to provide the food that you want. That's how a market system works, and it drives me nuts. It's so naive to think that like a system can function outside of that. And we did have systems that like existed outside of that in both communist countries and in pre-capitalist societies, and they didn't work all that well. Stuff that was bad about them. People lived in squalor.
Bro, they never had avocados up north back in the day. Okay,
they did not.
That's a recent development, and that is thanks to a capitalistic supply and demand issue. And now, even up north, they're relatively cheap and delicious.
Yeah. All right. On that note, though, we do have to head to break. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution. We're going to be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you soon. And I want to get to this other comment too. You ever watch the movie 1776? It's from 1972. Great libertarian movie. John Adams says, second flood, a simple famine, plagues of locusts everywhere, or cataclysmic earthquake, I'd accept with some despair. But no, you send us Congress. Good God, sir. Was that fair?
That is absolutely beautiful.
Funny.
And in that Star Trek video that we posted from Reason, where they're doing a little I want to say mockumentary, but a little like diaspora of Star Trek. At one point, Andrew Heaton character goes, Khan, which is an iconic event from a few of the Star Treks where Kirk is his nemesis. He just screams out his name and he goes, Congress. And it was just like absolutely perfect. The same vibe as that.
Yeah. No, it's again, yeah, you gotta watch that. That's good. I posted the Star Wars one too, so y'all can check that out.
And Patricia had a follow-up comment. The Walking Dead shows us the good guys are not always good. Yeah, like look, the good guys, the guys that we're on the side of, were also vicious killers, vicious protectors of their turf. They did try to apply some standards, but occasionally they had to violate those standards to protect their community. So it is an interesting philosophical.
That's always a thing, right? Like, can you apply the standards when you need to take harsh measures to protect your community? Like, that's always a moral conflict that exists. And as I love a lot of like post-apocalyptic shows and movies.
Favorite genres. I love it.
I do like it. I like there's this fantasy. Oh, like we live in this system where we have like a new opportunity to fight for liberty. We don't have the federal bureaucracy coming down on us and all this stuff. At the same time, though, it's like, all right, but if I want to get like my cheap like goods from China, I'm not going to be able to get my TV stand. You know,
Yeah,
it's not
and
gonna
look,
exist.
that brings me to the current political narrative, which I think will outlast this show. It will continue on, and that somehow China is an evil enemy of us all. Like they're literally just trying to trade with the world. I get that they're a polluter and that they don't fit the narrative, and we get into this like gotcha moment of and look, that the whole narrative for me about, global climate change and pollution. Yes, I want everybody to produce cleanly, but I want people to trade and I want freedom and I want people who are good at things to do those things. And China is inefficient producer, you know?
Yeah, no, they are. That's part of what it is, and just
Let's check out this
it.
one here. Max Justice TV,
I haven't heard of
Libertarian
that one.
Superhero Web Series.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, my friend Patrick Kirby is a good dude. He spends a lot of time on Twitter, propping up his libertarian friends and sharing their names and having good conversations. All right, he's definitely like me, Kevin, a right leaning libertarian for sure. But he's also is a real libertarian. Like he gets it. He gets us. Anyways,
Yeah.
thanks for the comment, brother. And then I got this one here. My buddy Ken Williams, Star Trek advice to New York State trapped citizens: how to obtain freedom. Jump in a rocket ship and head to other galaxies. I don't know. Like, where are we going with that, buddy?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Did up a warp drive. Warp on out of here.
Okay, hang on. We got one more we got to do before we go back to. Do you think global warming has something to do with my erectile dysfunction? Honestly, I guess it's possible. I don't know. Literally, that's hilarious.
Yeah, probably. It's just, you might as well
Clearly,
that.
Clearly,
Yeah.
microplastics changing the size of our. Never mind. That's. I don't know. I heard it on Joe Rogan, so it's got to be true.
Yeah, no, it's you can trust that guy. Just
So when we go back, should we talk about Heinlein and his impact on like Starship Troopers and?
Yeah, we'll talk about Starship Troopers. We'll talk about the Moon's the Harsh Mistress. Maybe I'll get to the one Star Trek episode that I think is actually libertarian, which we kind of mentioned on the show the other day.
We should talk about that. That's a good one.
Yeah, but so we'll talk about all that stuff. We'll head back in, I don't know, like 10 seconds.
All right.
And let's see. 5, 3. Welcome back to A Free Solution. I'm Kevin Wilson today, joined by Tim, the Freedom Variant O'Connor.
I'm here, Kevin, and I just got a quick little lyric reading. Though his mind is not for rent, don't put him down as arrogant. His reserve, a quiet defense, writing out the day's events. The world is, love and life are deep. Today's Tom Sawyer, he gets high on you, and the space he invades, he gets by on you. And anyways, that's a little nod to Rush, and they have some great libertarian messaging in their music. His mind is not for rent, not to God or government. Probably one of the most epic pop culture songs that express libertarian sentiment. And I like that song even before I was a libertarian. So
yeah, that's a solid one. Well, so
make this mess.
Yeah. I mean, we have a challenge in that, like, for our WYSL audience, we could play music over the radio, but we cannot do that for our YouTube audience. So we can't play Tom Sawyer, a couple other like fun libertarian songs. Again, you're listening on the live version. Throw out some song ideas for us too, but two other quick mentions. Taxman by the Beatles.
Yes.
Is another great one. And Pete Seeger's What Did You Learn in School Today is another great song with libertarian message.
Yeah, even though he's a commie like socialist.
He is.
That song really works. It really, really works for libertarians. Like it works. It's got a profound libertarian message there. Government control, government controlling narratives. It's good stuff. And honestly, this show is what made me aware of that song. So I checked it out afterwards. Yeah, our show. I mean,
that's right.
Not this specific show.
Yeah, right. But no, and listen, I know there's a bunch of other good libertarian songs out there. If you can think of any that are like top 200 songs, right? Like, and I know there's like niche libertarian songs out there, like, and those are great. Like top 200 libertarian songs, throw them out there. Love to hear your ideas. Yeah. But we will jump on to a few other things. We're gonna end up back in sci-fi territory, even though we talked a whole bunch about Star Wars in the first part of the episode. Didn't mention Han Solo at all. big oversight. I won't go into it now, but like also sort of a libertarian icon.
The smuggler traveling through the space, like engaging in free market activities. Who
Yeah, no,
becomes
he's
the bane
chaotic
or the
good,
scourge.
like making sure goods get moving in a world where, again, the empire cares more about political control than about economic growth, and then he helps get good to the right places. Now, sometimes it's not always the best things, but like a lot of times it's legitimate goods that are just controlled by the state, and people can't get without going through the black market.
All right. Yes, exactly. So look, check this out. I'm going to drop a quote on you. I think most libertarians are going to be familiar with it. When you vote, you are exercising political authority. You're using force. And force, my friends, is violence, the supreme authority from which all other authorities are derived. So look, that quote is, I want to say, on some level, an ultimate absurdity, and yet in a way it has like this profound ring of truth at the same time. And that quote comes from one of my favorite, I want to say, anti-war movies of all time, Starship Troopers. Robert Heinlein, like a creative genius, had a movie made, or had a book made into a movie where I feel like the director didn't really understand Heinlein's message, but yet somehow managed to make a profound anti-war movement that was both anti-war movie that was both hilarious, exciting, and had moments of profound, messaging in it. What do you think about am I overstating that?
No, I mean, like the director of Starship Troopers, the movie that came out, again based on the plot, is it Peter oh my gosh, I'm forgetting Verhoeven, is that his name? Yeah,
sounds right.
Yeah, Verhoeven. So yeah, he had interpreted Starship Troopers primarily about like fascism and nationalism, and how like basically war is the health of the state is part of that, right? And like all the other elements that have to go into it. So you have the service guaranteed citizenship type of stuff in there, right? Like you have to serve in the army in order to get rights like voting or reproducing, or like all sorts of different stuff. And in the movie, there's an asteroid attack on Buenos Aires, and they blame it on the bugs, right? They blame it on like an arachnoid species that exists, light years away, like a really, far ways away. And that becomes the rallying cry. And again, it's interesting because it's like a pre 9/11 movie too, but like, I think people kind of interpreted it after the fact as like analogous of like, oh, like, hey, here are these people who carried out an attack on us. And like, this is what drives both dehumanization of like the group that was behind the attack, or like that we've projected on like an entire people, even if it was just a small number of them who were behind the attack. And like the hatred that drives like people to commit inhuman acts against another species. And like in this case, again, like you build out the movie, and it's like there's weird scenes with Neil Patrick Harris like torturing bugs, and again,
I felt for the bug there. Like this.
Yeah, well, you're supposed to.
Harris character was an evil monster, and he could justify all of his acts through an intense hatred of what he forced people to perceive as another species. So that was the part for me where it got to be very anti-war and very profound in the messaging. When I see them using rhetoric that I was seeing being used in the mainstream media of the day, every time to justify a military action, I was like, wow. And I think more people got the message. Like they enjoyed the violence and they enjoyed the action sequences in the movie.
Right. Like if you just look at it at the surface level, like again, it's like it's supposed to like reference like how a lot of war movies end up working on. It's like, oh, like young, good-looking people, and they're going off to war, and it's glorious battle, and that's what it is. And like on the surface level, the way they talk about it's all that, but you start paying attention to some of the like the weird stuff. Again, the fascism that kind of takes place, the jingoism, the otherization, which again, like in this case, it actually is another species that looks different and can't communicate in the same way, and all this stuff. So it's really easy to just say like their lives are not worth considering. The in this case, like they go and invade this home planet, and the battle is not like glorious. It's ugly, like it's really ugly, horrific violence like that. Like these people who are like young people who are naive were sent into and just chewed up, right? And even though
Into a
they're
meat
all
grinder,
cheering at
bro.
the yeah,
Yeah.
it's a meat grinder. Like, and even though like like they're cheering at the end, you're like, oh man, this is brutal. Like
You
this is
watch your friends get torn apart. You're like,
yeah.
how do we act like yeah, there was some powerful message. Like the I'm doing my part. Like they even
Yeah,
went
I'm
into
doing
like
my part.
war propaganda commercials, like it was epic. Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
it was good stuff.
No, yeah, it's definitely a good movie and good. So some people are like, oh, like they're promoting that sort of nationalism. Like, no, it's pretty clear in the movie that like this is bad. Like it's like weird glossy propaganda combined with like the actual horror of what they're doing. And like if you come out of the movie thinking like, yeah, this is a great, fun, glorious war movie, like you miss something, right? Like the humans in this case are not really the good guys, and the whole thing was ugly, despite like the framing to kind of make it seem more positive than it was.
The capture of a super weapon, or the development of a super weapon by the bugs, right? Where
Right.
they blew Buenos Aires off the face of the earth, and it seemed like such an allegory, such a
Yeah.
parallel to the messaging that we receive from big government all of the
Yeah.
time.
And in this particular case, there's also a you know, it's somewhat implied like this might have been like a not actually the bug's fault. In terms
There
of the event.
was yes, I agree that
Yeah.
was the sense that I got, that it was
And again,
was
just keep in mind this is like not a 9/11 comparison. This was made well before 9/11. Just
Yeah, and they did a good job of showing how they cycle through. Like they lose the commander, and then the lead young man becomes the commander of the battalion, and it's just like,
yeah. No, say like
man,
it follows the beats of like a war movie, but like again, if you're paying attention to the details, like again the fact that like Neil Patrick Harris he's dressed like a Nazi, like
a Nazi scientist nonetheless,
yeah,
who
like it's
engages in occult practices to take on the bugs. It was honestly kind of beautiful,
yeah. All right, so we have a few minutes left, so I want to talk about one other Robert Heinlein book, and in part, like there's a quote from this book that's like mentioned in the opening sequence of our show. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Tan Staffel, that's where it comes from. Is there's no such thing as a free lunch. It comes from The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. And it's about like a community on the moon that starts to veer towards independence, and kind of the struggle for that. And so there's a bunch of interesting themes in this book in terms of like different family structures, the ability to be able to trade on fair terms, the ability to be able to regulate your own labor, and there is like a libertarian voice in this book too, is Professor Bernardo de la Paz, and he considers himself a rational anarchist. And it's funny, like as they're trying to like fight for their independence in various ways, like in terms of like, okay, do we fight for our independence with violence? Do we get the ability to be able to choose our own governance systems, as compared to like corporate and semi-state dominated government systems like that exist far away from them? Can we have independent governance that represents the interests of the moon? You have like this anarchist fellow who's like, yeah, like let's just have no government, and let's just kind of do our own thing, and we can like develop our own like voluntary interactions and voluntary currencies. And like it's very clear, like Robert Heinlein is like very much, he seems like a libertarian in a lot of his books, and a lot of themes of this book are libertarian. But even like the anarchist guy, everyone's just like, dude, shut up. Like just
dude. Exactly, and I did get that
which is the
sense
most
when you're-
libertarian thing possible, to tell other libertarians to shut up. But it's like kind of funny in this book because like he's trying to fight for this system. Like why do we even need like a governing document? Like let's just we'll just like do nothing. And I'm like, I'm paraphrasing pretty aggressively. I haven't read the book in like 2 years, but it is funny. Like there's just parts of the books where like some of the ideas, like, yeah, okay, like that sort of makes sense. And I get that his was push was part of the push for independence, but they're like, yeah, man, we're not going to do anarchy here. That's
it reminds me of the time when our local Otsego County Libertarian Party was trying to adopt rules of order and stuff like that. And I was just like, we don't need any of that stuff. I was the only one that voted against it, but I took a pretty good stand, at least on the first go around, before I was more obligated to adopt policies that fit the New York Libertarian Party's desires. Let's put it
All
that
right,
way.
man. We won't go into any LP politics here. But so if you haven't read that book though, it's fun. It's interesting. Again, it's sci-fi during that time is very aggressive on like again unique relationship dynamics, but it's a good book. And it presents a lot of ideas in a way where again like the most libertarian guy is a little bit like made fun of a bit, but also like bring some good ideas to the table. It's just funny for that. So quick other mentions, and I know we'll probably end up with getting the comments after the radio show, but Firefly, another great one. If you haven't seen that, and again, it like Malcolm in that show that the captain like takes like really a deontological approach to like freedom, where he's just like he again smuggler the ship the Serenity is like just kind of transporting goods back and forth, usually never anything like illegal or dangerous or ugly, just trying to get stuff to where people are, right, on all these outer planets, and the government wants to like regulate it, and his whole take on it is like, nope, I don't think people should tell me what to do. Why should I? And he was on the wrong end of a war of consolidating power in that government, in that system, but we're checking out short series and then a movie. And then Ghostbusters, another honorable mention. They're fighting the regulators to make sure that they can store their ghosts. Tim, any other quick ones you want to throw out in the last like 30 seconds or so?
Okay, Michael Corleone versus that senator character in Godfather 2, where the senator made very clear that he was there to shake him down and squeeze him for money, and found him to be reprehensible. That the government and the people involved in the government see you as tools and props and are there to shake you down and squeeze you for money. Like, it was kind of beautiful. Like,
yeah, it is. It's sometimes that's what government is too. All right. On that note, though, we have to end the radio show. We'll get to other stuff in the after show. Thanks again for joining us here on A Free Solution on WYSL. Have a great night, folks. Take care. All right. Now we can get to a couple other comments that we got here. I just want to make sure. Have either of you seen Orphan Black or Sweet Tooth? I have not seen Sweet Tooth. I have seen Orphan Black though. It's a good one.
what is that, a movie? What is that? I haven't
No,
seen
it's like a TV series.
Okay.
What's it? I want to say it was on. I can't remember if it was on Netflix or Hulu now. But that was an interesting one, and that's there's the woman. The woman is really interesting because she plays like several different like very distinct characters, and I think does a pretty good job of like showing like the uniqueness of each one. So it's
like
good
Robert Downey Jr. in Tropical Thunder, where he's the entire movie.
Not quite that level. She did not change her skin tone at all.
Okay, fair enough.
So not quite that. Or nor is it like Eddie Murphy level. And
Yeah, that was
so it's like
good
her,
joke
but like
there.
just wearing different clothes, and she's like like a different type of personality for each one. But so that is a good one. I'm trying to think of other stuff we didn't mention.
So look, I mean, War Pigs, like that's a big pop culture kind of thing where it's just absolutely anti-war. It absolutely, for me, displayed the amount of soullessness that sometimes leadership engages in when they're advocating for war. And I don't know, it's a pretty powerful song.
Yeah. Another good anti-war song is "Devour" by Shinedown.
Okay.
That's a good one. It's specifically looking at the Iraq War song.
John Denver did one when I was young. Something about a black box, and this is like the 70s, right? And it was around the Vietnam era. And if I recall correctly, I haven't been able to find it online, but I can remember listening to it, and it just did a really good job of presenting the horrors of war and encapsulated in music and in a kind of speaking narrative. Pre-rap before rap became cool. Sort of. but I've never been able to find it since then.
Yeah,
Or
I
when
don't know.
tried to look for it anyway.
Trying to think of like any other ones. I mean, let's see. I was trying to think of, because I was thinking about like some of the things that are like the opposite of it too, like some of these movies that just and shows that just don't make any
Oh,
sense.
I've got one on that issue, right? Like people were pretty what the heck is it called with that guy Frank? It's slipped out of my
House of
brain.
Cards.
Yeah, the House of Cards. That was one that stoked my libertarian passions because
Yeah.
like the system of power that this guy takes advantage of pointed to me that the system is the problem. I'm just like, a guy could actually do that.
Yeah.
You
I mean,
know?
yeah, I think we've talked about it before, because like our visualization of how like government works, like I think can be summarized in like, you think government works like House of Cards, and I think
Yeah.
government works like Veep.
Like what?
Veep. So it's the HBO show with
Okay.
Mary Louise Dreyfus. And like just imagine like this is a mockumentary about like Kamala Harris, right?
Right. Okay.
Like just like kind of bumbler, like strange that she even ended up in a presidential position, kind of resentful that she didn't end up being president, and like very clearly like does not really deserve to be there, and it's just bumbling her way through an impotent position,
Yeah.
but like interacting with like the real machinations of government, and like it's a farce, and like that's how I view like a lot of government is mostly that,
Yeah.
in terms of the political side, not like the bureaucratic deep state side, military side. Like that's a whole other thing, but the political side, I think government's more Veep, and you think it's more House of Cards.
Oh, well, I could see where it's a combination of House of Cards and Parks and Recreation.
Yeah,
Like
Parks and
that,
Rec is another like fair
yeah,
one.
I can't
Like,
believe you
it's
didn't think
a
of Ron
similar
Swanson
vibe.
to talk about at our libertarian show. Like that's like
Oh yeah, how do
overseas
we not talk about
Han
Ron
Solo.
Swanson? Oh my god.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
I could see it being a combination of House of Cards, where a bad actor can work his way up through the ranks, and Parks and Rec, where everything is about virtue and compassion, and still ends up with a governmental disaster. You know,
Yeah.
like I get it.
Right.
You know,
And so yeah, I mean, like, because like we're gonna talk about Parks and Rec for a minute, because like the Leslie Knope type of folks would like to believe that the world, like, it doesn't work like House of Cards, and it doesn't work like Veep. It works like the West Wing, which I really enjoy the West Wing, but it is a fantasy. Because like, have you ever watched it?
I couldn't stand the emotional platitudinous that nonsense that came out of it. I watched one show and Martin, what the heck? Well, anyways, the president guy, I'm just like, I can't handle this pragmatic, like virtue signaling that just it drove
Yeah,
me
it
nuts.
is.
So I
It
couldn't
is
watch
like
it.
the idealized Bill Clinton presidency, like Bill
Thank you.
Clinton if he wasn't shifty, right? Like
Yes.
that's what it is. And like, so here you have this guy who is moderately democratic, religious, pragmatic, and he's just fighting for better government. And all the people around him, sometimes they get lost in the politics in the moment, but ultimately they're all fighting for like what is best for America. Like it is the most like civic patriotic show like you can imagine, and I do like it, but also I'm like, man, people aren't that competent. Like it's just, or like sometimes like they are meaner. I'm like, no, they're just not going to do the right thing. And occasionally like there are times where like they do the wrong thing, either to maintain power or for whatever reason. Like there's a whole plot about the president being sick, and there's other times where people compromise information to help family. Like it's a good show, but like it's a fantasy. Like the people are probably a combination of both too nice and too competent. Parks and Rec, though, legitimately, I think that Ron Swanson is a good libertarian character. Now, Nick Offerman does not think so. The guy who plays Ron Swanson, like he does not like libertarians. Like again, there's a bunch of stuff like, and I mentioned this with Star Wars. I didn't talk about Star Trek, the one episode I want to talk about, and this is another one where, here's a guy like Nick Offerman thinks he's dunking on libertarians. Like thinks he's like just making fun of them. Like here's this hypocrite who's working in government, who's trying to waste government money, and like, is in conflict with his own beliefs by what he does. But like there are times where like he does make a legitimate case for like responsible spending. You know, there's like a whole crisis that goes on, and he doesn't want people to lose their jobs, but also he's like, we have to do something about it, grow up.
Yeah.
And there's other times, you know, like the one episode that's a lot of fun, you know, again, people like is it the one episode where he is talking to this little girl who's trying to write about government, and he convinces her that like government's terrible, uh,
That was
and turns her into a libertarian. And then even though like the mom comes in and like confronts her, and like she's like, hey, did you get my daughter to write this essay? The essay was how does government work? And all she wrote was, it doesn't.
it doesn't. Yeah. And then he kind of performed a mea culpa of some sorts. Like that was a good show. That
Yeah,
was.
and he gave her a claymore, and so
Yes.
yeah, and then he has other like fun moments where like he's trying to do like a barbecue, and like the park ranger's like, excuse me, where's your permit? And he just hands him a sheet of paper, and it just says, I
Yep.
do what I want.
I do what I want.
But like he ends up being like, again, for usually how libertarians are painted in most pop culture, when they're being on the nose about it, is like someone who's like inherently selfish. And like Ron Swanson is never inherently selfish. Like he's a good model of masculinity. He's like in weird ways like sort of like feminist, not in the virtue signaling way, but in the I believe in strong, powerful women who can like fight for themselves type of way. And
That's
he
good. Yeah,
yeah
that would like offer a good summary to how I look at the identity politics when it comes to the I would say that strong, powerful women are absolutely appropriate and important in our society, and let's not turn it into a virtue signal. You know what I mean? Like, let's not make it.
and that's how he sort of approaches the whole thing, right? Like, and so again, it's a good model for you know masculinity, and sometimes I mean sometimes it's over the top. Again, it's a comedy show, but
Well, yeah, but for example, he was never really threatened by Leslie's eventual success, right? Like
Yeah.
he was there to support her. He thought that even though he didn't agree with her use of government, he agreed with her, and he thought that she deserved, like, having her in power was better than having someone else in power. Let's say, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Which arguably I can see that as a libertarian, like, all right, I like this guy. He might as well be in power, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, a bunch of good stuff there. How did we not do Parks and Rec Wild?
Yeah. Whoops.
But let's see. Patricia threw out a handful more of these, so let's go quick. Hunger Games, another great one.
Yeah, very good.
I have not seen the new one yet. Was it the Ballad of Songbird? I don't remember what it's called, but the original series, again, great. You know, way in which like a totalitarian government exercises control over people, and you know even the you know the competing faction. It's without spoiling it too much, like there's a desire for power can end up being like corrupting morally, and you see that theme play out throughout the book a bunch of times, and then the struggle against that totalitarian regime that's willing to sacrifice the lives of young children for both entertainment and like the exercise of power is
fealty. They called it fealty, right? Like they're
Yeah.
like tribute. They
Yeah,
called
tribute.
it tribute. And
Yeah.
that movie did a nice job of expressing a dystopian possibility of centralized government, that the elites get to rule and the rest of the people get to pay homage to them in repulsive scenarios. You know,
Yeah.
like the poverty was by and large caused by the central district one, you know,
Yeah,
throughout
exactly.
the land, through regulation, through theft, through it was good. It was
Yeah,
good.
like by exercising control, you end up with poverty and you know, and the
Hunger.
and hunger. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what it is. And so yeah, I've seen that one on a handful of lists. The other one I have not actually seen, which is I see on a lot of like libertarian lists, are like Dallas Buyers Club, which roughly the plot of that is like a guy is trying to get AIDS medication, and he's smuggling it up from Mexico to help folks because like the FDA was going a bit too slow on getting approvals.
Yep.
So that's good. I have not seen that one. Trish throws out V for Vendetta. It's interesting. You know, that's an interesting one because that one's you know, the plot of that, I haven't seen this in a while, but basically like there's a virus that turned out to be engineered to that was imposed on the population, and then kind of strict control is exercised over the whole country of the UK because of a virus. Even though like V is not, and he's not really a good guy. Like he's not a great dude. Like it makes a good case for like extreme measures to fight authoritarianism. But yeah, it's a little bit morally complicated in terms of like as are like the people like weirdly connect that like fight against state authority to like Guy Fawkes himself, who is also not a great guy. Just like, if you look up the history of him, he was trying to impose Catholic theocracy on the UK. Like Guy Fawkes isn't great, and he tried to impose it through blowing up Parliament.
I was tempted, Kevin, to talk about the philosophy that can be found in the Bible versus, which is certainly like at the very least got to be considered part of culture and occasionally pop culture, and separate that from the theocratic decisions that have come from some extension of the use of what could possibly be a pretty decent self-governance philosophy, but I don't know if we should go down that road.
Yeah.
I haven't seen V for Vendetta. I do. I guess I have to.
Yeah, I mean it's okay. Listen, V's. I think people misremember V as being like a good noble character. V is not. There's a lot of torture involved, and he's part of it. So, and then Patricia threw out a few more of these, but I want to call this one Handmaid's Tale. I think Handmaid's Tale is also another good one. I have not seen the Hulu series that came out because everyone like made it about like, oh, this is like fighting Trump and whatever.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, so
I never was that exciting for me. I couldn't get past the first episode. I'm like, this is boring and weird.
Yeah, it's okay. Like honestly, I thought the book was pretty good. I like the book. The book is like Tim, are you familiar with the concept of like bootleggers and Baptists? So
no, it sounds like I should be though. So what do you got?
All right, so bootlegs is like it's a way in which alcohol prohibition works, right? Like you end up with two sides wanting to support the same thing, but they should be on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? So you have alcohol prohibition coming from Baptists who want to ban alcohol for more reasons, and you have people wanting to ban alcohol, the bootleggers, because they can profit from that illegal sale. And it's like that concept, but applied to like the extremes of feminism, right? In feminism and like social conservatism, because you end up with this system in which like anti-sex like feminists in like of like we need to do everything we can to protect women end up sort of like influencing the culture and teaming up with like super socially conservative folks to like control like the movement of women and like the lives of women and the reproduction of women. And it ends up kind of coming together in a brutal, awful, authoritarian system that totally dehumanizes women and makes them like objects of ownership of like powerful men. And there's a combination of also like an attack that takes place that makes it so that women, like most women, cannot reproduce successfully. Most people at all can't reproduce successfully. That they it's all like stillbirths basically. And so like in order to get the population up and the control folks, that's part of like the justification for that control is like, well, we need to make focus out. So like again, I think the book itself is really interesting, and it's one of those things that like takes place over the course of like maybe a decade, and you see this like woman that you would recognize as like a modern woman in like whatever time you project onto her, change like what happens, how she ends up in the position that she ends up in, like under this system.
Did you watch Thelma and Louise? Your little buddy up?
No, yet my boy Seamus is up, so he might be coming to visit. Seamus, come here, buddy.
All right. We came in at the same time.
Yep.
Say hi.
But I have not seen Thelma and Louise. So
I will say that I want to say something that's challenged Patricia to kind of counter it, because I felt like a big part of Thelma and Louise was demonstrated a bit of there was a certain aspect of feminism that I've always felt like there was a bit of like they self-destructed, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being powerful advocates with a story of success, their protest turned into self-destruction. And I thought that was kind of like one guy got them. The detective wanted to save them from their inevitable conclusion of driving themselves off a cliff. And I was sad. Like it made me sad that feminism, like it ended up they drove themselves off a cliff. They could have hung in there, made valid points about the awful people in their lives, and they bounced themselves off a cliff. It was just very disturbing. Hey, buddy.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, my boy Seamus is commenting on the skeleton in our attic. Seamus, do you have anything to say, buddy?
No.
Woo!
There you have
what's
it,
up,
folks. So, all right, buddy. Here you go. Go see a skeleton.
This one's easier. The big lab is hard to maneuver, but this one will jump right up into my lap all the time. This is a dog with hair, not fur.
Yeah. Adorable. So what one other quick one I want to mention, and then what we'll get out here is Star Trek. Again, I could do a whole episode on Star Trek. I will not. I mentioned this briefly before. Star Trek is not in any sense a libertarian show. Like that, not at all. They are aggressively socialist.
Yeah,
like
post-scarcity socialism, right? Like
post-scarcity socialism, right? So like their idea is they have unlimited energy, they have unlimited resources, they can reproduce whatever they want, and in this society, you know, they're very virtue signaling about it, like just aggressive. Like there's a whole thing where Captain Picard is like, you know, tutting a capitalist from an earlier age, and like we've moved beyond that. All right,
yeah,
calm down, bro. But there's a lot of that, right? In both the original, like when people are like Star Wars or Star Trek is woke now, like it's kind of always been, and they've been like annoying about it. But the themes of human exploration are still very good. So the stories are good enough where I could ignore the occasional preaching. But
right. No, I agree with that.
Yeah, but they're deluding themselves into thinking that they are in fact living in a post-scarcity society, because they're not. They have abundance, and there's a difference between abundance that you can get from free markets and, you know, everything else. Like you can have abundance, and everyone can be lifted up out of poverty because of that abundance, which is what they have. But they do have scarcity. Scarcity is a natural thing. There's always going to be some scarcity of something, right? And you know, not even going into like this Discovery series, which is good, but like there's post scarcity because they run out of deuterium, like then that becomes a problem. They have to solve that problem. But which I don't think they do. They kind of hand wave away, like, oh, we just found a bunch and we're gonna distribute it fairly. Like, okay, yeah, sounds like you're controlling, and you could have a market for that, but okay, you know, sure. But there's an episode that actually talks about like the Ferengi actually like recognize and address scarcity, because like hey, sometimes there's goods that like the Federation doesn't have or these other planets don't have, so we're gonna make sure those goods get to places to new buyers who want to do it. And they're kind of gross about it at times. I get it, but like, you know, Nog talks about the Great Material Continuum because they have scarcity on Deep Space Nine.
Right.
Like they need this part that cannot be replicated on station. So they need to find a way to get to it. So Nog barters and negotiates his way through a bunch of ships to try to get to that part. And like, it starts with like, okay, what happened to Captain Sisko's desk? And it's like, oh, well, I let someone borrow it for a while so they could take a picture. Oh, so you let someone borrow it so that he could, and now he's going to give us a part. It's like, well, no, he's not giving us part. He's giving us this other part. And it's like, well, we don't need that part though. Yes, I know, but this other ship needs that part. Okay, so that ship's giving us like the part we need. No, they're not doing that either. But they're giving us this part that this other ship needs, and then they have our part. Okay, so, you know, he just goes through this series of trades. He's like, no, goods want to find their way to the people who need them, and there's different costs for that. Even if we're not dealing when, you know, in money, like there are things that people want that they value more than other things. These ships have some spare parts that they don't really need. In trading for those, providing getting the additional value out of those trades of I have something I don't really need and I'm willing to part with it for this other thing that I need more. That is part of how the free market works. They still have free markets in Star Trek. It's still a thing. And they have to do that all the time. It doesn't always work with money in the same way. And it'd probably just be more efficient to do it with money, but they want a virtue signal about like, we're a post-scarcity, like communist society, and that we don't believe in money and everyone's taken care of, even though like they all have to spend money at Quark still. So they're still spending the Latinum.
It reminds me of a reality TV show called Barter Kings that I watched a few times. It got into like a guy would start with like, and we've seen this theme play out in sitcoms and shows where he starts with like a coffee cup and he ends up trading for a car. You know what I mean? Like he just kind of goes around and finds people who want to get rid of something, who may have interest in something that he has, and he gauges that out. Some of the show was him using his force of personality, which I thought was a little bit coercive, but it was actually kind of a fun show the 3 or 4 times I watched it. To continue with the Star Trek theme, though, I thought that in a way, fighting the Borg was a bit of a libertarian message where individuality is pretty persuasive, and that as a society, if we have individuality, we avoid a certain amount of darkness. I think that that's one of the themes, and we avoid a centralized leader like the Spider Borg Queen who wants to just consume everybody's culture. So whereas I'm anti-identity politics, I'm pro people having their own identity and being cool about it.
No, it was interesting because like Star Trek is, at least like Next Generation, is very like pro individualist. Right?
Yeah.
And like, and again, it's coming out of like they're making the show a few years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. That is like in the 80s, right, is when they start this up. And like they're thinking of that, right? They're thinking of like the collectivist menace that is the Soviet Union, where people like lose themselves to this like worker identity towards like eventually being like coerced into like whatever the means and the needs of the state are. And so the Borg is like a powerful metaphor for that. That's exists throughout like several Star Trek series. Next Generation, Voyager, Borg's a big part of that too. And how they consume and control these cultures. And then also like there's again great stuff in Voyager too, where they and in Next Generation where they talk about like how difficult it is to like untangle yourself from that system too, which ends up being an interesting metaphor for like post-communist countries struggling to adapt to new ways of thinking.
That the hot blonde babe yelling "comply" at people was like, and she.
Are you talking about 7 of 9?
Yeah, and she was trying so hard to be an individual and exist in society and teach other Borg children how to like express themselves, even though she was completely imperfect and like had moments of real hostility. Like there was something really intimidating about it when she was telling people to comply, because she was like statuesque and physically intimidating, and it was like, yet still like a valuable piece of the puzzle always, because she was really good at math, very good at engineering kind of thing. So so her conundrum was very interesting to me. Very like, how do you escape the Borg hive mind? And perhaps you never really can, but you can still try, and you can coexist, and you could reflect on your behavior and become better,
Yeah.
And I thought she did that. Like I thought that character did that, accomplished that messaging.
No, she did. It's great. And actually, I'll add one more on the economics of like post scarcity for Star Trek too. There's a like this is like a thing that takes place mostly in the Deep Space Nine arc, but like there's a group of folks who like the governments of the Federation and Cardassia make a treaty where they basically like swap some planets, right? Where they're like, okay, like they've been at war for a while, and we want to make sure that like we can settle this and that we're gonna not have any more conflict, right? So these governments just impose this thing on people, and actually it kind of starts in Next Generation too, because it's the whole thing with Commander Rowe and Picard. And so like there's imagine these people, they've lived on these planets for generations, and suddenly they're like, yeah, this government that you've never had any interaction with in your life has now decided to give your planet over to Cardassia. Yes, you have to leave. And they're like, well, we've been here for 3-4 generations now. Like we've built land, we've improved it. We have livelihoods here, we have trade here. And suddenly the government's like, well, that stinks. We're not going to support you anymore. Good luck. Right.
Yeah.
In fact, they end up actively like trying to get these people out, and they end up forming a group called the Marquis, who end up, kind of engaging in guerrilla warfare, both against Cardassia and the Federation. And so, like, again, post scarcity only matters until, like, while you are connected to like these resources, and it's against not really post scarcity, it's just abundance. That abundance to the point of it seems like post scarcity. As soon as you're cut off from that, you're cut off from like the industrial, like, creation of goods. Like, you can't replicate everything. You suddenly have to have a market for weapons and food and water and fertilizer and all this stuff. You might not have replicators to be able to do that. You might not be able to replicate the replicators to do all the other stuff you need. Okay, so like now you have to operate in a market economy again, and that's when they're getting goods from like the Ferengi, or they're buying, trading amongst each other or whatever, right?
The Marquis were smugglers too, right? Like, didn't they
exactly.
smuggling to get the goods they needed to the people that they needed to support, and they were like skirting the law, like,
yeah, right. And that's like that's one of the plots where like there's a trader that Captain Sisko gets involved in, but she's also like, trading goods to these folks, like that's getting supplies to them. And that's part of it. And so again, they're fighting, like, they're like, hey, we never signed your social contract just because you made some deal. Like, screw you, we didn't get represented in this deal.
That's funny, because that never played it into my brain, but as we're discussing it, I'm like, wow, what an amazing point about that show. The Marquis were, kind of rebels, kind of black market entrepreneurs, kind of, willing to use violence to protect their means and ends and their markets. Yeah, no, that's pretty good.
So I like they try to like play it off like most of the time like they're sort of the bad guys, but also like to me, like it's a bit mixed, right?
Yeah.
Like clearly, like
Commander Tupac. That's the one I remember. Tupac Shakur was in that one. No. What was it? What was the Vulcan's name in there? Was something like
Tuvok, played by Tim Russ from Rome, New York, of all places.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, he's from Rome. But yeah, all right. So we spent a ton of time talking about different stuff. I think we'll call it a day.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for doing this. I think it's going to be fun. We'll just and we should do another one or two probably before the moment arrives where you're going to be busy as being a dad again. Like, which that didn't come out right. You're busy as a dad. You're a proficient dad, but you're going to have moments now in the near future where every moment is going to be consumed by taking care of your family.
Heck yeah! Listen, like having a son is awesome. I know the first 4 weeks of having a baby kind of sucks though. Like, and if any of you are listening and you're like, you haven't had kids yet, like it gets a lot better, but the first 4 weeks are kind of a slog. It's a rough time, folks.
Speaking, I couldn't work only part-time, and luckily I had a business then, like it was I can remember my first kid. I was at a class in Ithaca, and I had to come home. Like, I had to leave the class unfinished. Like, I was in a class for my CPS certifications, and I had to come home because there was an impending emergency. Like, it's real. There's some real challenges. They're worth it. They're worth it.
It's like it's always a thing, especially like when they're young. But first 4 weeks, it's like 3-hour schedules. They eat, they poop, they sleep.
Yeah,
starts over.
That's it. And look, guys, your wife or your baby mother is whooped. Every single piece of her body, every single fiber of her being has just gone into providing the world with a new life. And so I'm sure you already understand this, Kevin, but be cool about it, man. It gets better and better and better. That's it.
Yeah. Don't, my wife did not appreciate me making jokes in the hospital room where I'm like, man, sleeping on this bed is so uncomfortable. And she's like, are you kidding me right now?
I know. It's hard not to, though. Guys like us, people like us are somewhat reserved, right? So it's easy for us to, like, this is really uncomfortable. Perhaps we're not as sensitive as we should be, but if I make you laugh,
yeah,
I did something positive, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, anyway, we're going to call it a day, folks. Take care.